When the population of Earth thought of other life on worlds far away from their own, they would always think about the Strong, a species that attempted an invasion and claimed millions of human lives. There was, however, another attempted invasion that only few knew about, an invasion not from another world, but from a different dimension. The lands of Quake were controlled by an entity with incredible power. The Shub-Niggurath wanted only to conquer the world she and her children encountered, and as her invasion began on Earth, an operation was set up to stop her before it began. What were the objectives of Operation Counterstrike? What did humanity learn from it? And how did this operation affect the rest of the Quake series? Here, we explore the lore and story behind Operation Counterstrike in Quake. Within the twisted, interconnected web of worlds and dimensions of Quake, Shub-Niggurath watched over all of her realms. This godlike being was an old one, a powerful ancient being that had existed for aeons. From her pit, Shub-Niggurath commanded her children to invade and conquer the world she sensed. The god herself could not move, she simply instructed. Over her time in existence, Shub-Niggurath was responsible for the invasion of countless worlds and dimensions. Her children were her soldiers, and as new worlds were taken over and absorbed into the Quake realms, the occupants of these worlds became mad and subservient to her. Her reach impacted untold worlds, and she was given so many names. The All-Mother, the Witch Goddess, and the Hell-Mother were just three of many. As the divine ruler of the realms of Quake, the Witch Goddess teleported her children across space from within her pit. She could not move, and some would have viewed this as a weakness. Yet, she was not only under the protection of her children, her skin was also impenetrable. In essence, unless an enemy was able to discover a way to destroy her from the inside, Shub-Niggurath was immortal and undying. Under her control, the realms of Quake held great secrets, beasts, magic, and power. Just 4 of these realms were the Dimension of the Doomed, the Realm of Black Magic, the Netherworld, and the Elderworld. These 4 worlds each contained an eldritch rune of incredible force. The Rune of Earth Magic held the basic foundation for all arcane power. The Rune of Black Magic held the abilities of the darker magics, and it was rumoured that it also whispered secrets of the history of the mysterious Shub-Niggurath. The Rune of Hell Magic burned with raw energy and kept secret the most horrid of magical abilities. Finally, the Rune of Elder Magic held the power beyond good and evil. The Quake dimension simply existed with their gods, horrors, and mystery. Outside of these realms also existed a world that had not encountered the chaos of Quake, magic, or the terror of the gods. Earth. In their short time on Earth, humanity had come so far in their understanding of the universe and its laws. Through observation, research, and development, new technologies were developed frequently. Advanced facilities were constructed and dedicated to the exploration of specific scientific fields, and the youngest minds dreamed of what was possible with the new knowledge they attained. The Cornudas Transport Research Complex was a very remote secret facility, a 90-minute drive away from anywhere. While some of this complex was visible above ground, the majority of it was constructed below. Within, the head scientist, Dr. Gilman, and his team had explored some of the most experimental fields of science, teleportation and biological adaptation to name just 2. The nature of this research was also deemed dangerous, to protect the complex from outsiders and to protect the scientists from any part of their work that could go wrong. Soldiers and guard dogs were used to keep the peace. Although a scientist at the complex, Dr. Gilman had a lot of power. Over his years of work, his research into teleportation technology advanced immensely. By the 1990s, a slipgate complex had been constructed. Even so, the activities that occurred within were kept top secret. Inside, Gilman and his team had learned how to generate earthquakes and used their power to disrupt the time continuum to activate slipgate portals. This was an incredible breakthrough. The use of these slipgates were at first tested to transport human and cargo across locations. Within Shub-Niggurath's pit, this old one sensed a new dimension, a world for her to conquer. A connection to Earth had come to her, so she plotted and used her power to connect her slipgates to Earth's. After the continued use of the slipgates, Gilman discovered that they led to different locations, different dimensions. The team had discovered the realms of Quake, also known as the Dreamlands. Unknown to them, they did not know of the horrors inside. This was groundbreaking, and to enhance their understanding of these new realms, Gilman ordered for a complex to be constructed on the other side of this slipgate. The dimension, however, the dimension of the doomed, was also home to hostile creatures. Having peered into this new land, Dr. Gilman connected with Shub-Niggurath, and his mind slowly corrupted. He had become a part of the Dark Young, almost a child and follower of Shub. In his human form, he attempted to understand the Old One he had encountered. As time passed, Marines were sent into the lower levels of the complex. They helped protect the team that worked there, but those above ground noticed that when some of the soldiers returned, they expressed sudden outbursts of fear and rage. The base counselor, Tacito Flores, worried for his clients, but he was kept in the dark of what was happening in the labs below. Commander Rice also showed signs of instability, in which he suffered with constant night terrors. They had begun just after his first inspection of Dr. Gilman's lab. It is likely that he had looked at the eldritch letters of an Old One, and these night terrors were actually visions of the Dreamlands. In his second session, Flores noticed that Rice's mental state had deteriorated even further. He stated, "We are the Dark Young." That the other Marines had also been fitted with bad blood and bad bionics. He had even had bionics attached to his sternum. Rice had become a dreamer, a person whose interaction with an Old One had connected them to the Dreamlands. Unknown to him, his fate was certain. Under the thrall of Shub-Niggurath, he would create a new region in the Dreamlands from the darkest parts of his mind, or he would be consumed by them and transform into an elder god. Dr. Gilman's mind had been corrupted by Shub-Niggurath, and the other workers in the lower levels had also been twisted. Shub-Niggurath felt that the humans were weak enough and that it was time to begin her invasion. Back in the complex, Dr. Gilman's mind finally snapped and he entered the slipgate to ascend and be one with Shub-Niggurath. A call at 4 AM in the morning meant that something terrible had happened. Ranger was a veteran Marine. He had served in Vietnam and he knew how to handle himself. He said goodbye to his wife Annie and his children and left. By 5:30 AM, Ranger reached the facility and entered. Commander Rice was under the influence of an Old One, yet Ranger did not notice. The commander explained that an enemy, codenamed Quake, had used the slipgates they had developed to send through death squads to kill, steal, and kidnap. That Quake was planning to unleash his real army, whatever that was. "You're our best man," Rice explained. "This is Operation Counterstrike and you're in charge." As Ranger scouted the region, he heard shots back at the base. To stop this invasion, maybe he and his squad could enter the slipgate and reach the enemy. To his horror, he discovered that the enemy, Quake, had already claimed the lives of every Marine, and Commander Rice was nowhere to be seen. He did not know what Quake was, but it had to be stopped to save Earth. As a dreamer and thrall of Shub-Niggurath, Rice had not called Ranger to the base to stop the invasion. He had instead called him as another sacrifice to Shub-Niggurath. Having completed his task, Rice entered the slipgate into the dimension of the doomed, and he was consumed from within. His dream created the elder god, Goroth, and his mind became trapped within him. As the only survivor of this corruption and massacre, Ranger was forced to begin Operation Counterstrike alone, so he entered a slipgate into the unknown. Within the lair of Shub-Niggurath, the All-Mother saw how the minds of these mortals had been twisted to eviscerate all life on Earth so that her offspring could live there. This Old One planned to secure the 4 runes to use their power. As Ranger entered the slipgate, he found himself inside of the base Dr. Gilman had constructed within this realm. It was apparent that the team had sought to explore the dimension of the doomed, but they had grown mad during their time here. Whatever the leader of this invasion was, Quake, it had the power to twist minds. Ranger encountered the corrupted Marines and Rottweilers that had once protected the facility, now under the influence of something greater. Though there were many more of them, the veteran defended himself well against the Fallen. Further into this dimension, the Marine traversed through interesting locations, some of which were the Castle of the Damned, the Gloomkeep, and then he arrived within the House of Chthon. Not only did he have to fight against human and dogs, but he also encountered the entities of this realm, Scrags, ogres, fiends and shamblers to name a few. Just in front of a pit of lava, Ranger approached and picked up the rune of the Dimension of the Doomed, the rune of Earth Magic. However, as he did this, the guardian of this realm appeared from the lava. This Outlander was an invader in its land. He had also stolen a rune. Enraged, Chthon launched fiery projectiles at Ranger, but they missed. During this, the Marine discovered and activated an electric trap. Upon multiple strikes of electricity, Chthon fell and returned to the lava. Ranger had been lured to this dimension as just another sacrifice, only to have risen as a powerful threat to Shub-Niggurath's plan. In his hand, he felt the power of the rune of Earth Magic, and as he looked at it, it flooded his mind with knowledge. He learned that this was just one of the dimensions of the lands of Quake, and the slipgate would allow him access to the others. Most importantly, there were 3 other runes in 3 other lands. If he collected all 4, he would get access to the enemy, Quake, and have the opportunity to stop its invasion of Earth. With an actual plan in place, Ranger entered the slipgate and found himself within the realm of black magic. This was a land of ancient castles and strange beasts. Throughout the Ogre Citadel, the Underearth, the Ebon Fortress, and many more, the Marine encountered and fought with Death Knights, fiends, and zombies to name just a few. Then he reached the dismal Oubliettes, the home of the second rune, the rune of black magic. This was a dangerous region, but having discovered a rocket launcher, grenade launcher, and a double-barreled shotgun, and various other weapons on this journey, Ranger was able to destroy the creatures of this dimension. The most challenging of all were the Vors, spider-esque monsters who had the ability to launch a destructive spiked homing missile. As Ranger picked up the rune of black magic, it throbbed evilly in his hand and flooded his mind with more knowledge. He was shown that the leader of the dimensions of Quake was Shub-Niggurath, the evil Hell Mother whose terrible plotting had led to so much death and horror, but she was not invulnerable. With an actual name for his enemy, Ranger passed through a slipgate into the next realm. The Netherworld was a hellish realm. It offered Ranger the ability to once again test his combat skills as he fought against the same creatures that had plagued the Dimension of the Doomed and the Dimension of Black Magic. He explored the Vaults of Zin, Satan's Dark Delight, the Wind Tunnels, and then eventually he reached the Chambers of Torment, an ancient temple with lakes of fire. This was a particularly challenging region as many Vors wandered the hallways. Despite their power, Ranger's will was stronger. As the Marine held the Rune of Hell Magic in his hand, he felt its heat scorch his flesh. The rune showed him just how powerful Shub-Niggurath was, what she had done, and what she planned for his homeworld. This only made him more determined to take the witch goddess down. Behind the location of the rune, Ranger encountered another slipgate and found himself in the Elder World. The final rune was in this dimension, and Ranger searched for it in the sewage system, the Tower of Despair, the Palace of Hate, and then he came across Azure Agony. Once again protected by Vors and the other guardians of this realm, Ranger reached the rune and held it in his hand. The rune of Elder Magic pulsated and showed him more of Shub-Niggurath, that she planned to use the runes herself to clear all life off Earth and bring her own foul offspring to live there. All the creatures Ranger had fought against were her descendants, controlled by her. Having acquired all 4 runes, Ranger used them to blast open the gateway to Shub-Niggurath's pit. If he succeeded, he would be regarded as a savior to his planet. If he failed, the runes told him that it would be as if he never existed, for the Shub-Niggurath had immense power. The dimensions of Quake existed not only across space, but also across time. The threat of Ranger loomed in the hallways of her lair, and the witch goddess sensed that he could stop her plan. With her godlike powers, Shub-Niggurath summoned her children to fight the invader and defend her. These creatures were nothing in comparison to the will of the human and the runes he wielded. Then he reached the inner lair of the beast. Across a lake of lava, Ranger looked at Shub-Niggurath in all her glory, a strong body with 3 large tentacles. Yet his battle was not over. The Hellmother could not fight, but the Shamblers and Vors she had teleported into this location could. Vors launched their homing missiles at the human as Shamblers charged at him. With everything he had, and Operation Counterstrike as the only thing that mattered to save his planet, Ranger destroyed the Vors and Shamblers. His weapons, however, had no effect on this elder god, but he did notice that a floating, spiky orb moved around this chamber. It even entered the beast. After some observation and experimentation, he also noticed that a slipgate was tethered to the orb. This was what he needed to take her down. As the orb moved into Shub-Niggurath, Ranger entered the slipgate and instantly appeared within the witch goddess. His sudden arrival in a compact location destroyed the All-Mother from the inside, and it was done. The enemy, Quake, he had been tasked to destroy, was dead. Shub-Niggurath no longer had control over the dimensions of Quake. Sent to this dimension as a sacrifice, Ranger had proven his skill and cunning to be greater than the powers of Quake. Operation Counterstrike had been completed, yet Shub-Niggurath was not the only god in the realms of Quake. Ranger had succeeded in his task, but this was just the start of a much greater war. Operation Counterstrike was one of the most important secret operations in human history. If Shub-Niggurath was successful in her attempt to conquer one more world, the human species would have been completely wiped out. Arguably, the prevention of the witch goddess was even more significant than the future fight with the Strogg. Even so, it appeared that the Strogg also encountered Shub-Niggurath during their exploration of technology. Some would even speculate that she was responsible for how they became the twisted mix of bionics and organic matter. Despite Ranger's success in Operation Counterstrike, there were other Old Ones and strong forces that were eager to take her place, one of which was Armagon, Shub-Niggurath's general and replacement as leader of the Quake Dimensions after her death. Armagon also heavily resembled a Strog unit. Ranger had believed that the death of Shub-Niggurath, and as such, the completion of Operation Counterstrike had put an end to the war between Earth and the dimensions of Quake. However, this was just the start. I have always loved Lovecraftian elements in all forms of media. Event Horizon and The Mist are two of my favourite movies, both with heavy elements of horror and the unknown. I think the reason I love Quake so much is because it fits so well into the genre. Shub-Niggurath is a creature of incredible power, and I do hope that if we get a Quake 6, we will return to the story of magic, mystery, and ancient gods. We did get that Quake 6 teaser after all. The Strog are fantastic, still I love fantasy and magic more. Quake 1 has to be my favourite story in the series. We got to explore so many dimensions. Ranger is precisely what the players want in a game like Quake, a character that the player can put their own headcanon into and play him as themselves. All we know is his name and a small backstory. This video was about Operation Counterstrike, so I tried not to mention too much about him, but I will make a dedicated video about Ranger in the future. Quake's lore is huge. The Dreamland, the Dreamers, Goroth. These are just three huge topics. In terms of Shub-Niggurath, I, like many in the community, do not believe that what we fought in Quake was an actual Old One. I believe it was one of her Dark Young, and the real Shub existed somewhere else. It should also be mentioned that nothing really dies in the Dreamlands, they simply return in another form. As for Shub-Niggurath, Sync Error, a part of the ID team and Lore Master, has stated that they intended Shub to be part of a cycle, death, rebirth, and a new form. As I mentioned before, the Lovecraftian elements of Quake are what drew me back to this series so many years after I first played it. Madness, crypts, and the unknown is the perfect backdrop for a game. Lovecraft wrote so many unsettling stories. My favourite is the statement of Rudolph Carter. If you love the exploration into the unknown, I highly recommend you read some too. Shub-Niggurath is heavily used in Dreams in the Witch House. Operation Counterstrike was the first of many operations in the Quake series. I intend to cover them all. That was everything I wanted to cover this week, so please like the video if you liked it, please share it with other Quake fans, and most importantly, subscribe if you want more content like this. Finally, I'd like to thank my gold tier patrons and channel members: Jonas, Lewis, Queen Arby, Fluffy the Dragon, Chicken Guy 791, Ruben Mendoza, Duke, Toadnut, Oren X, Azu, Karatana, AJ, Verona, Comfy, BG Games, Apravis, Arnis, Blaze of Glory, Cole Sherman, Yauli Rodriguez, and Nabar. What is your favourite operation in the Quake series? Which Quake do you prefer? And what is your favourite HP Lovecraft story? Please let me know in the comments below. This is where our story ends. Check back next week for a new one.